Wow, Luna, Rasha, and Masih, what a powerful stories.
Thank you.
My name is Aqeedi. I'm a fellow at Civita, and I take great pride in sharing a stage with you. The way we're going to do this talk is that we're going to have a conversation, elaborate a bit of the challenges and your stories, and we're also going to open up for questions and comments from you, the audience, before we end at 8 o'clock. But you had a very powerful story, Masih, and you ended with what you would like to see more of from the Western world and the Western approach, and being here in Oslo, in Europe. Could you elaborate a bit about how you would like the politicians and the civil society in Norway and Europe to approach Iran?
Sure. Look, when I talk about numbers, it hurts me because these people are not numbers. Less than 4 months, the regime in Iran killed almost 2,000 people. And this is very obvious what the people in Iran wants right now. When they see that the European government just want to have a deal, or they want to have business or commercial contract with the same government who killed its own people, it is very heartbreaking. I mean, it is beyond sad. So I often get this question that, so if the politicians or the European country do not go to Iran, then Iran is going to be isolated. Or are you looking for war? But I have to be clear. We don't have any war. We are anti-war activists, but we have to condemn the war which the Islamic Republic imposed on its own people. 2,000 people got killed. 7,000 people are in prison right now. The coronavirus actually entered in prison. So that's why we need the international community to recognize, not just empty words, to recognize the civil society and negotiate with them. I want to just give you one example that why they don't do that and they refuse to do it. I often actually hear from the politicians in Europe, I'm sure that my sisters from Iraq and Lebanon, they heard that a lot, that we don't want to interfere in internal matter. That's so sad. See what's happened about coronavirus. The Islamic Republic's mismanagement, not only mismanagement, this is a crime against humanity, because the Islamic Republic knew about coronavirus entered Iran, but they kept silent. Why? Because it was election time, and they wanted to get votes from people, because it was the anniversary of Islamic Republic, and they wanted to show the rest of the world, see, a lot of people show up in the street. So that is why the coronavirus spread everywhere in different cities. And now, Islamic Republic's mismanagement, you can now say, the first coronavirus found out in Iraq from Iran, the first coronavirus found out in Lebanon from Iran, in New Zealand, and I don't know, different countries, 15 countries. And that shows the politicians, when you call a dictatorship regime or the human rights abuse, we don't want to interfere in internal matter. Internal matter can infect you as well. Human rights abuse is not internal matter. It's a global issue, and they have to, learn and take a lesson from what's going on right now.
Rasha, the situation in Iraq, obviously Iraq has been the last 20 years, and after the invasion heavily debated in the international community. But what are you looking for when you're looking at the international community in terms of making the situation better in Iraq?
So first of all, when we talk about the Iraqi government, it's important to say that is this actually a legitimate democracy anymore? What democracy in the world kills over 700 people? Now, these were killed by official security forces and state-sanctioned militias, not rogue actors. No, these were part of the government, part of the institution. So when also these official leaders, United Nations and other countries, when they go and meet these leaders, are they telling them that actually, or are they shaking their hands and just acting like, let's pretend 700 people have not been killed, 700 young men have not been killed? They also have names and stories and families. There was recently an article in the Washington Post. I urge you all to read it. It's about the young men when they're killed in the protests and the girlfriends that they leave behind, because again, the conservative society, these young women cannot go and say, oh, my lover has died. She has to weep in silence. And just imagine the heartbreak. So what is the world doing about this? Continuing to act as if this government is legitimate. We need more pressure. The government has already resigned, but we need international assistance on how are we going to make that step to have a more transparent democracy, whether it's better, not interference, just monitoring and observing the future elections, putting sanctions on certain officials when those especially who are condemned and have been guilty with these crimes, because they are war crimes.
And Luna, when the situation in Lebanon, what do you want from the international community in terms of making the situation better in Lebanon?
I think that the international community should stop recognizing warlords who have been governing us for years, ever since I was born, and even more. The elections are just a facade in Lebanon usually. The civil society tries very hard to implement efforts to be more represented. We have managed sometimes, but for the time being, we still have warlords governing us. Our Speaker of the Parliament have been a Speaker of the Parliament for over 25 years. He hasn't been bored. He's not bored of this job, and he's not making any changes. So why do you even stay? We have the same names over and over again. If the international community starts recognizing the civil society more and starts highlighting their efforts more and insisting that they are present in the meetings and in the change-making game, then maybe we will have some sort of change in Lebanon, and the people will be encouraged to elect differently. Because also the people are responsible for making choices, democratic choices in our country to change the political game. So.
And just to follow up again, what the international community can do, and Masih, talking about Iran, there's been a lot of talk about Iran deal with Obama and Trump not wanting to following up on it. Sanctions, as such, many people argue, and I think there are some merit to it, that if you just impose sanctions, that will hurt the people more than the regime. What is your thought on that argument?
That's a very difficult question, because I know sanction hurts people, but I know better that the Islamic Republic hurts Iranian people before sanction. So, and I put the blame on the government in Iran, because when they had a deal, Iran deal, people were celebrating in the street and saying that after Iran deal, nuclear deal, we are waiting for human rights deal. So what happened? The government kept arresting people, kept killing people, and most important than this, people were looking for the benefit of the deal. Before President Trump, just tore the deal, what happened? The workers in Iran haven't been paid their salaries for month and month. And that is why people took to the street and were asking that, where is the benefit of the deal? The main slogan was that, if there are Iranians here, they can confirm that. Don't send the money to Syria. Don't send the money to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, to Hamas. Don't send money to Bashar Assad. ایرانی‌ها اینجا هستین یا نه؟ So, پول بنزین گم شده، خرج فلسطین شده. So that were the main slogan. You didn't hear a single slogan about sanction. You didn't hear a single slogan about America. مرگ بر آمریکا. We didn't hear that. So we all heard مرگ بر جمهوری اسلامی, death to clerics. Or most important than this, I want to tell you, if people of Iran are suffering from sanction, then why the government in Iran, why the regime in Iran did not cut the budget of the children of the Ayatollahs, Khomeini and Khamenei? Both their children have websites, have organization, حفظ نشر آثار Khomeini and Khamenei. So the same year, this year, these two Ayatollahs' children's budget increased. It's on the news. And the same day, we have like 40, 50 religious institutions. The budget of religious institutions increased the same year. The budget of Revolutionary Guard, the budget of Iranian propaganda tool, Islamic television. So what they did, they increased the petrol of gasoline. Why? Because the poor get poorer and the rich got richer, and they put the blame on America. But go and find out that why the same government, all the relatives and children of the same ayatollahs are where? In America. All of them. So to make long story short, I ask not only the US government, I ask the European government. They have to sanction the oppressors. They have to sanction the Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard who kills people in the street, who torture people, who bring people on TV to do false confession should be sanctioned. Qasem Soleimani was not a hero. He should be sanctioned by the European government. And what I want, the European government join the US government and understand that this is the tipping point. This is the historical time. People risk their lives, get killed, and they have a message. We, the people in Iran, have a dream. We want to get rid of the religious dictatorship, but the European government want to shake the hand of these government because they're looking for deal. They're looking for business and commercial. This is my opinion.
Rasha, to follow up what Masih said, there has been a discussion and also, in fact, legislated in the US a sort of Magnitsky law, which is that you target specific people,
Yes.
a human rights sort of sanctioning. Is that something you would like to see in the Middle East and Iraq in particular? Is it possible to do something like that?
Well, this has started to happen in Iraq. So the militia leaders, the ones who are definitely condemned and have blood on their hands, they have been sanctioned. And every time a militia leader is sanctioned, the reaction in Iraqi streets is cheer and joy, because these are the same people killing them, or at least orchestrating the killings of the protesters in particular.
So you would say it's effective?
It's definitely effective. Now, not necessarily targeting them with drones, because that the consequences to that on the protesters themselves. Now, this is not to say that I mourned Qasem Soleimani at all. Everyone who knows me knows that I did not. But the consequences on the protesters can be very deadly, because there is no rule in Iraq, and it's basically militia rule at the moment. From whether it's the pro-Iranian, pro-Islamic Republic militias such as Asaib, Ahl-Haq, Kata'ib, Hezbollah, or even the Iraqi militias, those controlled by Muqtada Sadr and his thugs. So they take it out on the protesters and on civilians. However, this act can be definitely activated against politicians themselves, within where their travel is restricted, their properties overseas, their assets are confiscated, in a way that, okay, we need to pressure you in order to get this right. You resign, oversee the change in government. This is what we want to, this is what the protesters have been wanting. Well, I just want to follow up on one thing. One question I get asked a lot is, where's the leadership of these protests? It's been going on for 5 months. Where are the leaders? Now, the protesters on the streets, they say it's a local movement, it's a grassroots movement, so we don't need leaders. The problem with this is that there are definitely leaders, but they're being assassinated. If you look at the names that are being assassinated, they're usually the slightly older, in their 30s and their 40s, because there are intelligence that have infiltrated the protests and they collect information. Assassinated in their homes while they're sleeping, assassinated on their way back home from the protest venues, and their numbers are now in the tens. It's very hard to achieve a leadership when you are being assassinated and targeted, and no one is doing anything about it. There has not been one trial against any of these assassinations. The killing of the 2 protesters in Basra, there's an entire New York Times investigation going on right now, and there's very little evidence and zero cooperation from the Iraqi government to release the information they have. This is why we need such acts.
Luna, how is the situation in Lebanon concerning the uprisings and the protest? Are there emerging any leaders, any organizing way to transform it from an protest to actual political power? Is there anybody having a plan or any way to transform it?
The thing that's happening now in Lebanon is that the civil society is trying to lobby more and to prepare for elections, because they think and we know that the elections are the only way to actually get to the parliament and infiltrate the parliament and the political blocs and start making a change. We don't have a leadership in Lebanon yet. Maybe we're on the safe side because we're not getting as many physical threats, or what's happening in Iraq is heartbreaking. We're still very lucky because we are not at that tip of the iceberg yet. But we do need leadership urgently, and this is something that everyone has been talking about, because we are not sure how long these protests will be peaceful for, and not from the protesters' side. There are many political players. There are parties and political blocs that do not want these protests to continue. There are political allies who are damaged from both sides of the political game in Lebanon. So we might have the privilege now to take our time and to reassess and to take a break because of the coronavirus and to regroup and everything. People are taking back the streets. In the past few days, there were roadblocks. The momentum has been refreshed, but at the same time, we do need leadership because eventually the protesters will have to go on to the parliament or to political blocs and they would have to stand up for them. And it's time for us to be able to access the parliamentary square and the parliament. Today, I went into the Norwegian parliament and I haven't even stepped foot in my own parliament in Lebanon, and I never met the Speaker of the Parliament for an interview. Yet I sat in the parliament here, and I felt so privileged to have the ability to discuss these things. We need to do this in Lebanon, and this is why I fear that in the upcoming weeks, the protests and the people's anger might double, because they want to get to the parliament. It's where they are voting. It's where their choice remains. So the leadership has to emerge, but at the same time, the economical situation, this is something we have to insist on. The economical situation is scary, it's challenging. With the coronavirus, with the shortage of the medical supplies in the hospitals, people are being a bit hesitant now. So this is why it's a double-edged sword at the moment.
And to follow up on the prospect of elections, some people would argue if you have elections in Lebanon or elsewhere in the Middle East, you will have religious extremists winning majority and so on. What would be for the prospect of free and fair elections at all? And how would you assess the situation now?
It's a very good question because maybe 2 years ago they would have won in certain areas. We had people in North Lebanon, in Tripoli, which is a Sunni city. We had the people were tearing down famous leadership posters and pictures. Hariri, Miati, Karami. These are the politicians that usually represent this area and the poverty that has been happening there for years. They did not really touch base on any solutions in the past years. So people are just shredding down their pictures and removing them. This says a lot. It's happened from Tripoli. It says a lot about Lebanon. It means that these people, these politicians, are no longer representatives. And also, another religious aspect is South Lebanon, where people, for the first time on October 17th, they started protesting against Hezbollah and Amal movement. And this is big. And they are being attacked. Their tents are being burned because they are Shia and they are against these movements in the Shiite sect. So this is also something that people and the international community should acknowledge. Not all Lebanon is Hezbollah, and I have to keep repeating this. Not all South Lebanon is Hezbollah. We have friends there who are suffering now to raise the Lebanese flag and to make their voices heard. So we are trying, they are trying. It's a long road, as I said in my story, but I can sense the courage in cities that were conservative, in cities that were not as secular as I am. They are changing and they are making this change. So the elections will be different, if not 100% this time, maybe 50%, but we're on the right road.
Rasha, wasn't the elections after the invasion in Iraq an example of religious extremism, tribalism, succeeding in what was pretty high voter turnout?
Yes, absolutely. The first two elections. Now, last election, 2018, where the religious cleric Muqtada Sadr's party won the majority of the votes. That's what we hear all the time, but only 30% of the people voted. So if we're going to talk about the majority of the people are those who sat at home, not because they were lazy. The first two elections, as you mentioned, the turnout was massive. I voted. I was very happy to vote. It was definitely a privilege, just that sense of freedom. We take these elections seriously. Obviously, young people are dying for democracy in Iraq. They don't take it for granted. However, the last elections, it became clear that this was a fraud, that these were not true elections, that a lot of votes, the way the political system is set in Iraq is very manipulative. You can only vote for certain parties, and you cannot vote for individuals. So there's always a party that usually is Islamic-based, Dawah party or whatever. There's always a clergy involved. These are the parties you end up voting for. And this is what they want to change, the voting system. So last time, the majority, 70%, they did not vote. These are the majorities that are today. This is the majority that is protesting today. So the elections in Iraq, it's the government and the international community. I will stop saying Iraqi government. The international community needs to recognize that the elections in Iraq are no longer. It's just like it is in Lebanon. It's just for show. People don't believe in them anymore. They're boycotting them. They are no longer legitimate.
Before I move on to Masih, I just want to say that I assume we'll be open up for question and comments from the audience. And remember that we plan to end at 8 o'clock, so it's better to be sooner rather than later. So just raise your hand if you want to come on the speakers list, and I will recognize you. Masih, obviously, and for very good reasons, we talk a lot about women activists here, and being the only male, I can assure you that's not why I'm asking this question, but what is the role of men?
I love that question, actually.
Well, that's great. I'll give you the
Yeah.
opportunity. What are the attitudes of men? Aren't they also a victim of the structural system here?
That's a very good question. Today, when I met with the members of parliament, I was amazed by one of the comments from a female member of parliament in Norway, saying that you shouldn't just ask the female politicians to support women's rights movement in Iran. You have to ask the politicians, whole politician, men as well, because we have to get them involved in the movement. When we go to Iran or we talk about Iranian movement, we have to talk men and women together. So, and I gave her an example that yes, we need men. I'm going to give the example here. When our foreign minister, Javad Zarif, went in France meeting with the politicians, one of the female politicians challenged him and asked him that why you actually oppose compulsory hijab on us. We are not Muslim, we are not Iranians, so why should we wear hijab when we visit your country? And Javad Zarif said, because this is part of our culture, and you have to respect our culture. So I got very mad that he's a man. He doesn't know how it feels to be forced to wear it or to be forced to take it off. So I have to make him understand that. So I photoshopped him in our so-called culture in hijab, and I shared the picture online. And I said, how you feel? This is just Photoshop forcing you to wear it, but we've been wearing that by force for 40 years. Then I was bombarded by photos and videos from men in Iran joining us and saying, that's a good example. We have to practice this. And that actually shows you that how educated and how progressive are the men in Iran. And this is actually the misogynist government using men to oppress women, downplaying our cause and saying that, they use the word honor, saying that if you don't, calling men and saying that if your wife, your daughter, your sister, your girlfriend do not wear hijab, then you're a dishonorable man. So through that campaign, when men got involved, a lot of good dishonorable men showed solidarity and saying that we don't own women. So that is why I think the movement got more like gaining momentum after that, because women were very proud, standing shoulder to shoulder with their men. And I want to give one picture, a video, a man in Iran standing between his wife and his mother. Mother wears hijab, wife was unveiled, and man wearing hijab and saying that I wear this hijab to respect my mother who chooses to wear it, and to respect and understand the feeling of my wife who's forced to wear it. This is such an amazing message, and that is why we need to get men involved.
Rasha, you mentioned in your introduction coming from a pretty patriarchic community in Mosul. How do you change the culture there, and especially among what you could call conservative men? These are your brothers, your fathers, your sons. How important is it to change their mentality?
their mentality is not going to change. You have to force them. And that's what's happening in Iraq. This is what the female protesters did. They forced the change. The infamous cleric, I don't like to call him a firebrand. I feel that gives him too much credit. I just call him infamous. Muqtada Sadr gave a statement recently calling these women, kind of shaming them in a way, calling them, saying that they were stray, that they did not reflect our culture. He said, I call on them not to mix with men and socialize with men and to put on hijab. Hijab is not compulsory in Iraq by law. It is kind of by community, at least in conservative societies, but it's not a law. The reaction was also social media. Young men in Iraq went to social media, put on hijab in solidarity, and also to mock him and to see how ridiculous he sounded. Other young women were posting photos with their female colleagues, some of them with their boyfriends, and saying, yes, this is how we're going to socialize. We are going to not listen to you anymore. So you need to force this change. And what are they going to do? One of the young women, actually, and she wanted me to say this, what can they do? We've been kidnapped, we've been tortured. 5 young women died amongst the protesters as well, including 2 medics. What more can we do? The wall of fear and taboo has been completely broken now. So they've torn it down. So they're forcing this change. And also it's a generational thing that the older generations need to understand, that this generation, Generation Z, they're very, very different. And they're more global. They've reached out to the world. They understand what the basic human rights values are. And they're not going to stop.
I haven't noticed anyone wanting to come on the speakers list, and I remind you that we are moving rapidly towards 8 o'clock, so if you want to take the floor, you have to give me a sign. I noticed one person sitting over there. I noticed you. But before I give you the floor, I just want to ask Luna a somewhat controversial question, but still I want to ask you that. That is the role of religion. Is that a very negative thing for the women's situation in Lebanon? And is there any way that religion could play a positive role?
Well, we have a diverse society in Lebanon. The diversity in the society was very much reflected in the protests. And the way I see it and the way I saw it, religion did not affect the protests negatively. We had many war zones front lines in Lebanon that were, and narratives, civil war narratives that were broken in Lebanon and that were based on religion. So in the Lebanon protests, when protesters were being sometimes attacked by political party thugs who came from different backgrounds, the areas that they were attacked from had a symbolic meaning in the civil war. They would come from a Muslim area, and the protests would be closer to a Christian area. So what the women did in that sense is that Muslim women who wore hijab from these Muslim areas, one of the areas is called, for example, Shiyah, they came together with mothers and Christian women and Christian mothers from Ain al-Rammane, which is another area. They gathered together and they marched towards the midpoint where the civil war had happened to raise a symbol and to raise a story that even though some men might want to highlight the narrative, some thugs from different political parties, some anti-revolution people want to highlight the narrative that the civil war and the division is still there and that religion will divide the Lebanese people, we the mothers and we the women refused this narrative. This also happened in another area in central Beirut, between Khandaq, Al-Ghami, which is an area known to be supported by the Amal movement, and Ashrafiyya, which is an area known to be Christian and to be supported by Christian political movements. The mothers organized the march, they held flowers, they met in the center, and they broke this narrative. And it was something very emotional. A lot of people called it, melodramatic, or we don't need this right now in Lebanon, we need to fight, we need to burn things. They burned the bridges of the civil war, and that was the start. Will religion affect Lebanon? Of course, forever, because we have 18 sects in Lebanon. It is not easy to convince people to be secular. We might abolish religious, extreme religious opinions or extreme religious laws. We might edit them, we might change them, but we will never be able to twist the society's mentality completely into a secularist society. However, I am sure that we can find this way in between, because the mothers and the women already did that with the help of men in Lebanon, because also let's not forget that men played a major role in the Lebanon protests. Women protected men. Men were arrested instead of women at some point. So this is also to be fair to both sides.
Yeah, there are a lot of men here as
Of
well. We have to
course.
be fair enough.
Before I give the floor to the lady sitting in the third row, I also want Masih and Rasha
You have a lot of questions for me.
Yeah, to weigh in on the question of religion. You continuously call the Islamic Republic. Does that mean that you think the religion and politics in Iran in itself is the negative thing? Is there any way it could be a positive thing?
Absolutely negative. This is 21st century. And as a woman live under Sharia laws, I have to say that all my rights were away. We want religious to be separated from politics. And I don't think a religious government can bring democracy at all. So simple.
Rasha, the role of religion in Iraq?
Given that I don't live in Iraq right now, I would speak on behalf of the protesters, or at least what I've concluded from them. Their problem is not with religion per se. Again, it's the way it's exploited within politicians, the way politicians tend to exploit it and discriminate and force, the kind of laws, and we see what's happening, whether it's in Iraq or in Iran. That's the issue. It's not religion itself. So the true values, and this is what's very distinctive about these protests, they understand the concept of liberalism. You see, as you saw some of the pictures, some of the young women protesting don't wear hijab. They're obviously very liberal. Others are in hijab. So they respect both. They respect the choice. The thing is that don't fool us with religion. Don't steal our money in the name of religion. And there's also the sense of outspokenness against clergy rule because they sense there's a lot of exploitation within it.